Join me every month for the inspiration to find your finish line. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Find Your Finish Line. I'm Mike Riley, and we've got a very exciting podcast on because we're going to preview the Vinfast IRONMAN World Championship men's race in Kona on October 26th. I've got a gentleman with me that he kind of knows about racing Kona and definitely knows about all the pros. So we'll talk about that and bring him on in just a second. Pillar is a sports micronutrition company. Pillar Performance is my presenting sponsor, and the easiest way to describe it is hydration and carbohydrate products that would take you through to the finish line. Their mission is to get athletes to the start line in the best condition over and over again. Since I was introduced to the product in Ironman New Zealand in 2021, I've been taking Pillar Triple Magnesium, and it's been a game changer for my sleep and recovery. I take it about 30 to 40 minutes before I go to bed. And then I find I get deeper sleep, less cramps if I had a hard workout, and my recovery is better for the next day's workout. Plus, you also need to try Immune Vitamin C to keep you healthy and strengthen your immune system, especially as we all end up moving into the winter months, except for you down under, okay? So for my North America listeners, you go to thefeed.com and enter code FINISHLINE when you go to the Pillar products. Finish Line, you receive 15% off for first-time buyers of the Pillar product. Now, for my international customers, go to pillarperformance.shop, enter Finish Line for 15% on your first purchase of the Pillar product. All right, here he is, Mark Allen, six-time Ironman World Champion, amazing coach, and TriDot certified Ironman U coach. Mark, welcome to Find Your Finish Line.
Thanks, Mike. Always great to be on. And I don't think there could be a more appropriate time than leading into Kona this year. You know, we saw, obviously, in Nice, a pretty incredible women's event, a women's race. First time they raced there, had their own day in Nice, France. And Laura Philipp just, she just, I wouldn't say she ran away with it, but she kind of did. She was just so on it with her pacing on the bike. She and Kat Matthews were so aggressive on those downhills. Like, you know, I wasn't expecting that. I thought that, some of the women who actually train on that course would have done better, but they didn't. And then they got to the run and Kat just wouldn't give up, even though Laura eventually did pull away and win her first championship. And I have to say, her emotion at the finish line was just incredible. It was so genuine. And she's been so close before, obviously. And she's shown in some of her other Ironman races around the world that she has the capacity. She had the skill, she had the genetics, she had the smarts to be able to pull off a championship. But like anything, an Ironman World Championship, just because you train well, just because you did really well at another one does not guarantee you success on that one day that counts the most. And so anyway, I'm as you can tell, I'm excited as we go into the men's race this year.
Yeah, I even wore some of the leis that I got from my last year there in 2022. I'm psyched. I'm not going to be in Kona, but I'll definitely be there with you in spirit. And you always give me updates during the week. I always text you and go, Mark, what's going on? You send me. So thanks for the updates. I got to tell you, I interviewed Laura this morning for my podcast, and I did a preview of the women's race with Didi Griesbauer. Well, Didi and I, we swear we mentioned Laura's name maybe once or twice. Laura says, you didn't even pick me. You didn't even pick me that I was going to run fast, Mike. And you have to tell Didi that. And I was so embarrassed. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. But that's what happens. We weren't really there to pick the exact winner. We were there just to talk about the field like we're going to today. So we got to be careful. Maybe we should just mention everybody and then we won't get in trouble.
Yeah, sometimes when somebody isn't mentioned, that actually gives them that little extra spark to go, all right, I'm gonna show all of you that you did not mention me, and I know what I got. Actually, interestingly, if I went way back into my career in 1989, going into what became Iron War, my first victory there in Kona, I'll never forget that. That the favorites were named. Bob Babbitt, put his list of top 3, top 5, but I wasn't even in the list of favorites. He put me as like a dark horse, and I'm like, dark horse? And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna. So that was that little extra, you want people to think that everybody's rooting for you, cheering for you, believing in you. But especially nowadays with the talent and the depth of talent, and and actually some of the uncertainty going into Kona, I think it's actually it might be a little bit hard to pick, but it's also super exciting. And when I say there's a certain amount of uncertainty, what I mean by that is that, as we all know, we haven't had a men's race in Kona in 2 years. And with that, you sort of lose a little bit of that continuum that we're used to having at the Ironman World Championship, where, somebody wins, and then the next year that person's usually back and they're defending, but you've got these other people, and the year leading into it has been shaping a certain way, and you kind of have a better feel of how everybody's going to race together. We haven't seen the men in this kind of event together. Obviously, there's been some big Ironman races, full distance racing in the past 2 years, but there hasn't been a Kona in 2 years, and so some of the guys who are maybe getting toward the end of their career, they're 2 years since we saw them race. One guy for sure, Patrick Lange. There's other guys who we haven't seen develop their strategy, their fitness, their skill set, and how they're going to approach Kona in 2 years. The guys who are developing, guys like, let's say, Magnus Ditlev, and so you really have to look at it from that perspective. Like, okay, we know what happened 2 years ago. We've seen some other racing, but how's it all going to pan out in less than 2 weeks?
I was thinking the other day, Mark, about the consistency we had over the years of Kona. Go to Kona, October. Go to Kona, October. And if somebody was racing male or female, and strategically they didn't do something or bust away when they should have, or chase the pack when they should have, they sometimes regret it because they don't win the race. But they go back the next year and they can kind of fix it and tweak it. But with a year in between, it's like, think about it. Lionel Sanders hasn't raced there in a while. So how do you think they'll have to readjust their strategy? Sam Laidlaw had a hell of a race in Nice last year, but that's not Kona. 2 years ago, he had a great race in Kona. Can he run as fast as he did 2 years ago? Because they lose that year. Does that break up their strategy a bit?
It breaks up the strategy for the athletes who are using their other competitors as the main driving force in figuring out how they're going to train. It doesn't break it up for those athletes who are more focused on figuring out how they're just going to get faster year to year. So like I was more somebody who was trying to figure out, how do I optimize my performance? How do I optimize my training? And because I don't know who's going to show up on the start line, and I don't know who's going to make that next level jump up. And so I just have to be prepared the best I can, and you have somebody else, let's say like Chris McCormick, who was completely focused on figuring out how he was going to beat each one of these competitors. So if that is your strategy, I think you lose a little bit of the edge, because you just don't know exactly how the other guys are going to be performing there. Even if you were there 2 years ago, the guys who are more focused on figuring out, how am I just going to get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, those are the guys to really watch out for. And so I would actually put kind of at the top of that list Magnus Ditlev. He's a pretty low key guy, but he really does seem to just be focused on figuring out, how do I start? How do I get more out of what I'm doing? How do I get more and more and more? And you might say that about Lionel Sanders. He's definitely driven a lot by, maybe even more by when he's not doing well than when he's doing well. And I know that he's probably thinking, okay, I don't have a lot of tomorrows left in me here, and so I've got to really make this one count. Has he made that jump? Has he built himself back up to the point where he can really compete against these other guys? I mean, he had a great 70.3 in Oceanside earlier this year. He hasn't over raced this year, which I think is a really critical piece. You don't have to race a lot to do really, really well in Kona. But he's an unknown. I think if you're going to look at the guys, well, let's back up. We have 4 guys who have won the Ironman World Championship who are competing this year. Sam Laidlaw, who won last year in Nice. We've got Patrick Lange, who won in 17-18. We've got
Gustav.
Pardon me?
Gustav Iden.
We've got Gustav Iden, who won last time out, and we've got Christian Blumenfeldt, who won the previous year in St. George. So we have those 4 guys. If I was to kind of break them down, I would say, there's actually, I don't have a big pulse on some of the Europeans because I'm just not in their neck of the woods enough to really get those subtle feels of what's going on. But when I was over in Nice, there was a lot of buzz around Patrick. A lot of people were saying, he's really been training well. He hasn't over raced. And again, for sure, he's one of those guys that's probably going, I don't have 5 or 10 more of these in me. I've probably got 1, maybe 2. So for sure, he's going to be somebody to watch out for. He has not broken that mythical 2 hours and 30 minutes on the marathon. Super close. Can he do it in Kona? If he's off the back on the bike, is he going to save it a little bit and just see if he can blast that marathon and set a run split that will hold for, instead of 27 years, maybe 28 years, So anyway, he for sure, I would say he's one of the favorites. Christian Blumenfeldt, obviously he was focused on the Olympics for many months now, and I don't know if he's happy or not with his performance there. I would say probably not. He's also an athlete who really seems to be driven by when he hasn't done well, making sure that the next time he goes out, he does something incredible. He made that transition back up to Ironman distance pretty quickly. Paris wasn't that many months ago, but it's athletically, it's much easier to go from Olympic distance up to Ironman than it is to go the other direction. And part of the reason is, and I'm rambling here, but like I said, I'm so excited to talk about this stuff. When you do Olympic distance racing, you really raise your VO2 max. And so you have this super high ability to just suck in a bunch of oxygen and get it in quickly. And so then when you drop down on a lot of the intensity workouts, build in those aerobic longer workouts that are required for Kona, you have this huge engine that is taking charge. And it doesn't take much to build that endurance back up. And the reality is probably Christian, even in his Olympic distance training, was doing stuff that was pretty close to what some guys might actually even do for a full Ironman. So
for the Ironman training.
Yeah, he's for sure somebody to watch out for.
Well, Gustav Iden, I have been at finish lines bringing him in, and I'm just amazed at his talent. And in 22 in Kona, he set the course record at 7:40, ran like a 2:36, which was a good run for that day. I ran a couple minutes faster than Sam did, but I don't know. Do you think the carryover is there from 22?
Looking at Gustav Iden, obviously he's the reigning Ironman Hawaii World Champion, 2022. But since then, he's really struggled with some injuries, and he's had some Achilles problems, and he's really there was a big period there where he lost a lot of fitness, and he's been working to get that back. It looks like it's coming back, but I would say of all of the returning Ironman World Champions who will be in the race, he's probably got the toughest road to getting back to the top of the podium of any of them. And part of it is that, the level of the other guys is really, really high, and it's very hard to just sort of like, make that huge jump up in your fitness. I have seen anyway, it seems like guys who are actually pretty consistent throughout the year leading into it, giving us those windows into like, ooh, I think that person's going to do something special. And Kona is a race where somebody is going to do something special. It's not the kind of race where everybody's going to race mediocre. There's going to be a couple guys that are just going to pull an off the charts performance. And so I think Gustav is really going to have a hard time being at the top of the podium. Maybe he'll surprise me. I hope he does. He's a great athlete. Obviously, when he won in 2022, he looked pretty much almost invincible. But then he showed that he's human, like everybody, and that you have to be careful. You can't overdo it. You have to recover, and without that recovery, your body can break down, and next thing you know, you're not even training. So yeah, he would be the biggest wild card in those four that we mentioned who are previous champions.
Mark, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned about Lionel of having a good Oceanside race in March, early in the year, and then not really, as we always used to see, killing himself with a lot of races during the year. And I truly do think that's an advantage for him. He's over in Kona already, and he's just had this plan this year that seems, I don't want to say more conservative. It may be more conservative from the outside, from us looking in, but I got a feeling he's been doing some things on the inside that has really been building his endurance and stamina that we may see in Kona.
Lionel's interesting because he's not a static athlete. Like what you see in Lionel today is not what you're going to see a year from now. And I like that because he evolves as a person. He evolves as an athlete. Some things he's tried have helped him. Some things he's tried have hurt him. But he's also dedicated this year to that goal of like, all right, this is a year for me to try to make a statement in Kona. And he's been so close. We've seen him close. We've seen him almost win it. And I think now he kind of realizes it's not that he needs to overhaul the entire system, but just make those few little changes that, just take you up that next little notch, build a little bit more on the run than he's had in the past. And I'm super excited to see. I would say, while I say that Gustav might have the hardest time sort of hitting the top of the podium again, I think Lionel is the one who could surprise us the easiest.
I do too. What about on the USA side? I've been watching Rudy Von Berg all year. He's had some decent performances. Ben Canute hasn't been racing a lot, but you know what his training's all about. How do you think those two USA athletes are going to do?
Rudy is he's somebody that I think we all keep waiting for him to take that that last notch up. He's
the big step.
Yeah, he's done top 3 in huge races. He's won major events around the world over the course of his career, but he's always been like, how Laura Philipp was always just kind of there, but couldn't quite put it together.
Yeah,
and I think everybody's sort of waiting, like, okay, when is Rudy going to make that? When is he going to make that step? Because he has all the skills, he has the experience, he has the support of his family, and this history in the triathlon with his father racing, and I think it's just one race is going to do that for him. Whether it will be this year or not, let's see. I hope so. He's got skills, he's got experience, he's dedicated, he focuses. I don't think he's struggled with some of the health issues that have gotten in his way in the past. And so, being healthy throughout the course of the year is super, super important. Somebody who's consistent in their training over the course of the year is going to do way better than somebody who's really on top of it in March and then they get sick for a couple months. So we'll see. Right. Ben, I think he's...
You're hesitating. Why are you
hesitating?
I
think he's maybe more suited to 70.3. That's just my feeling and my sense. He might prove me wrong. I love it when athletes prove me wrong. It just shows like, okay, they had something that they haven't shown before. But I think his talent is a little bit more toward 70.3 racing. He comes from a short distance background, and I think with just some of the consistency of some of and the strength of some of these other guys over the swim, bike, run in the Ironman distance, it'll be hard for him to let's say win, he could be top 3. That would be a great day for him again. But let's see, who haven't we talked about though?
Well, I had written down Braden Curry too. It's always kind of an unknown. When we watched him race in St. George and chase down almost past, Lionel Sanders at the finish of that was a 70.3. Yeah. I don't know. He just is a talented athlete. He can do everything, adventure racing, whatever it may be. But I always put his name down just because I think he's got it in him to have a podium finish. But sometimes he'll finish 11th, sometimes he'll finish 3rd. You just don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's one of his assets is he's just not afraid. He's not afraid to put it out there. He's not afraid to take some risks.
Yeah.
And sometimes those risks in Kona pay off. Maybe you make a break on the bike with somebody or a couple of guys, and all of a sudden, 3 or 4 of you come into transition, and you've got 5-7 minutes on the rest of the field. That's a big chunk for the others to make up. And if you haven't burned all your matches to do that, then you're almost guaranteed a top 3 spot. So yeah, I always keep my eye on Braden. He's definitely somebody to never underestimate. Same with Ben Canute. Never underestimate him. Yeah. Never underestimate Rudy. But I think the guy who really seems to have been developing over the last 2 years, as I mentioned, is Magnus Ditlev. He's this massive physical presence on the course because he's so darn tall. Yeah. You look at him and you think, he's just too big for this sport. But you sort of would think that a little bit sometimes when you looked at Jan Frodeno, like the dude's too tall, but he has these levers, and I think, when you see Magnus, he's always calm. He never gets rattled. He's very methodical with his training. He's proven that he's very, very consistent at full distance racing. Look what he's done in Roth. And, he hasn't won Kona, and I'm sure that he is just like, this one's going to be mine. I think that's kind of how I'm looking at it this year. The big question obviously is, I think in 2022, he was maybe a little bit tired coming into the race from, previous performances that year. That's, I'm sure, a big lesson that he's learned from. So let's see. We haven't really talked about Sam Laidlaw. Going into Nice last year, everybody thought he was a favorite because he knows that course really, really well. And obviously you have to be able to bike on that course, but then you have to be able to run. And, people commented like, oh, well, he won the race on the bike. And I will argue that. I will say that the reason Sam Laidlaw won last year is because he actually had a really good marathon. No, it was not as fast as Patrick Lange, but it was completely solid. And, he got that buffer on the bike, but he won it because he had a marathon that was really, really good, solid, and fast. And so if we look back to 2022, when he set the course record on the bike, if he can kind of have that same level of cycling, which I'm sure he will have, or maybe even dial it back a notch or two so that he saves that little bit extra for the marathon, he's got a good chance. And the other thing, like I spoke about, I think the guys that do the best in Kona are the ones throughout the year who seem to be racing pretty consistent, but maybe not over racing. And I would put Sam in that category this year. He's had a history of canceling out of races, having things happen in his personal life where I'm not going to race that race, even though it's one of the biggest races of the year, but he's been super consistent this year, had a great race at the T100 in Ibiza, looked super fit. And so I think he's going to be hard to beat, Yeah.
And think about at Kona 2 years ago, he was only 2 minutes behind Gustav. I mean, he went 7:42. And as you know, in Nice, he rode 4:04. I mean, He could. I don't know if he could ride 404 because of the winds in Kona, but I think that's a good point on him riding strategically, trying to hammer riding strategically because he knows he probably doesn't have to run a 235. He could run something a little slower and still win the race.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. One of the things going back to the that comment I made earlier about young guys they've been developing for 2 years since we've seen them here. He's one of those guys, super young. He's he's on that upward trajectory. We have not seen the best that Sam Laidlaw is going to put out there, and so he's had 2 years to contemplate his race. Last time there, when he got second to Gustav, he's proven that he can win in a big race in the Ironman distance. To do that in France with all that pressure, that's a good statement right there. And I think he's cocky. I think when he feels like he's on, I don't think he thinks there's anybody who can challenge him. And so if he just races smart, I think he's got a very good chance of, obviously being on the podium and potentially being the Ironman World Champion here this year, 2024.
Right. Mark, do you think the men and the women, for that matter, when they take a look at the Nice course, different than the Kona course, everything's different, as we know, that they'll say, you know what, I'm really a Kona racer type athlete, or I'm really a Nice type athlete. You think some of the pros will say, you know what, I'm just going to stick with Kona every other year. That'll be the World Championship because I don't know if I got a chance at Nice, or I don't want to change my strategy, change my training. You think they'll choose kind of back and forth in that manner?
I don't know if they'll
because of the type of athlete they are.
Yeah, well, for sure, age groupers will do that. Some age groupers that I spoke with in Nice are like, I'm just not good in that kind of heat in Kona. There's no way I could ever have a good race there. I was waiting for Nice, and now I was able to finally race it, have that be the World Championship. And, the reverse is obviously true. We have athletes who are like, you know what? There's no way I could ever be prepared for that bike course. And so, but I think the pros are going to show up both places, but clearly, as an athlete, you're going to favor one or the other. Like Laura Phillip after the race this year, she said she goes, thank God, I love this course because it was actually like we had this true race because there was just no way that anybody could, packs couldn't form on those climbs, and packs are not going to be forming on those descents. And so she said the bike ride was a very different dynamic than it is in Kona, where, even though it's non-drafting, you've got this long line of athletes and there's less terrain to sort of break it up, especially if it's not windy. And we haven't had a real heavy wind race there in quite a while. And my guess is we're probably not going to have a heavy wind race there for a while also, especially this year because it's later. Usually the winds are a little stronger earlier in the fall. Mm-hmm. So, but for sure, some of the athletes are going to prefer Kona. Some are going to prefer Nice. The top pros are going to go to both places. But, I was probably an anomaly because I love both courses. Nice was easier for me to get ready for. I love that kind of terrain. Kona was much harder for me to get ready for because I just can't generate that same power on the bike that it took, on like long grades and sort of rolling stuff. But I still love both courses. And so I gave equal billing in terms of my preparation.
Yeah, you were kind of not an anomaly, but the Nice course, because you won that race like 342 times for God's sakes, and then you'd come to Kona. Because what time of year was Nice when you were racing it? That was
in the very early years. It was in September. Nice September. Kona was in October. But then during the main part of my years when I was winning in Kona from 89 onward, Nice was in June. So it was perfect timing to have June be Nice and then do some short distance racing. And then in August, start prepping for Kona, which would be whatever weekend in October. The cool thing this year is, we will have Sam Laidlaw racing in Kona. He won Nice.
I
So
know.
if he can win in October in Kona, he'll be the first athlete to be the Nice Ironman World Champion, Ironman World Champion in Nice, and Ironman World Champion in Kona. And I think over the years that's gonna hold like a special place for those
Yeah.
who do that,
Yeah.
because they are very different courses. They're testing very different aspects of you as an athlete, not only physically but also mentally. They're very different races to race psychologically and strategically. And Kona is kind of the course where both on the run and the bike, you can kind of get into this internal space, and you can sort of get your mantra going, and you can get into that just mode where you really stop thinking and you're in this quiet space, and it's more like you're just enduring, waiting for the right moment to take place where like, this is where I need to make my move to then hopefully win the event. Nice is very different. You have to focus and concentrate the entire time on the bike. You can't let up. You think, oh, the downhills, I can relax. No, you do not relax on those downhills.
Right.
You do not relax on the uphills, because you're constantly saying, is this hard enough, or is this too hard? Is this hard enough? Is this too hard? When am I going to eat and drink, because my heart rate is 160 beats a minute? So you have all this complexity of mental stuff going on in Nice. You're never in that Kona drone mode, right? And so it's a very different kind of race to focus. And especially also now with the marathon being on the Champs-Elysees, there's a crowd the entire way, and you have to shut that out, because that crowd, as motivating as they are, they sort of blind you to maybe listening inside and going, whoa, wait a minute. They're exciting. They're getting me motivated, but they're also making me go too hard.
Yeah. Interesting point. That is an interesting point about Sam too. And I think that's why we were really looking forward to Lucy Charles Barclay to race Nice, because on the women's side, that could have happened, but obviously it didn't. And I think Sam and Lucy are kind of the same type of athletes that way. Obviously, Sam can swim, but not the ability of Lucy, but they're the same type of athletes that could probably win them both. But I think you're right. If Sam does that, there's going to be guys and women out there going, hey, I got to get them both. That's like a separate crown,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe it should be.
It's two different jewels in the same crown. It's an Ironman World Championship. But I think over time, if things continue like this, where they're split and we go to Nice on the alternate years, I think that's going to be a real achievement that somebody can say, look at this, look what I did. I did it in Kona, I did it in Nice, two very different races. That's kind of like the complete package as an athlete.
Yeah, yeah. Mark, when you're in Kona, you're a fan, you're going to watch the race, but what functions are you going to have? I know you're doing stuff with TriDot and some other things. What are you going to be doing in Kona most of the week?
I'll be busy as a beaver there. I'm actually going to be there as one of Ironman's race ambassadors, along with Craig Alexander. They brought some women in for the women's event in Nice. They're bringing Craig and I in to be at a lot of the key functions that Ironman puts on, the Parade of Nations. They have a VIP party. They've got the welcome banquet, awards banquet. Tons of stuff going on that will be at Legacy. They have a Legacy reception for the Legacy athletes, and so we'll be at all of those. And then on top of that, of course, I will be doing a lot of stuff with TriDot, especially at the expo, and giving some tips and all that. And then I'll also be actually doing some stuff with Ecoy helmets this year. They just announced, or we just received the first Mark Allen limited edition helmets that are in now. So super cool.
Really?
I'm super excited about that. So I'll have on several different hats there. I'll be there obviously with Ironman. I'll be there with TriDot. I'll be there with Ecoy, and it's just exciting for me to still be involved with the sport, to be coaching athletes on TriDot, to be representing TriDot, the company, and sharing so much of why that's such a great platform, to be part of the Ironman Ohana, the Ironman family, still, giving my thoughts and connecting with the athletes, and hopefully, calming the nerves a little bit with those that I talk, but also keeping them inspired enough to really go for it. And then, being there with on behalf of Ecoi, also super exciting partnership there. And ultimately, as you know, Mike, it all comes down to race day, and it's exciting to see the first people come across the line. It's exciting to see the finishers who come in at the end of the day also. And we all gathered there each year. Last year with the women, such a unique experience, such an amazing day, and with 2,700 men who have not raced there in 2 years, I'm sure they're all going to be completely frothing. It's going to be intense. It's going to be exciting, and I just can't wait.
It's going to be a very exciting week for you. That's cool. And we've talked about this before. You were the first world champion I ever had the honor to call in 1989. And you're connected at the hip, whether you know it or not, with Gustav Iden, because he was the last male champion I've ever called across the line. So maybe one day we'll get together for a picture and send it to me. There's Mark. There's Gustav. Number one, the last one.
Well, we all have our periods in the sport where we're doing certain things. Like, I was an athlete competing for 15 years, and then that transitioned into doing stuff with companies and corporate speaking and coaching and helping craft a lot of the educational things that are going out to help coaches and athletes. And, you had this incredible run from 1989 until 2022, where you were literally calling thousands of athletes across the line. And, we all reached that point where it's like, okay, that was a good run. And you hand it off to those who have been coming up. And, that's just what makes the sport so great, is that there is, event now, since 1978, there has been this history that has been being built. And each year, every athlete who comes to the World Championships and races is creating a new story and a new chapter. And there's no one who's more or less important than anyone else. And, it doesn't, as you know, it doesn't matter who you talk to. You can talk to any athlete who is there, who crosses that line, and everyone has a story. Everyone has a reason and a purpose for being there. And some it's very personal, some it might be professional, but no one gets there on their own. They have their support crew, they have their family, their friends, their coach, their training partners. They've sacrificed certain aspects of their life to be prepared for this one day that is so special. And when you bring all of those people, not only the athletes, but the fans and the support team and the sponsors and the people who work the event, and we all just bring our energy onto that big island where we are truly guests of this incredible place, and we put out our best. I think that just sets up an energy that is so positive for those who are there, but also for the world, to strip away all of our differences and bring us together with this commonality, and to just celebrate something that's very challenging, that's personal, but we share it together and we create it together.
Yeah, it's a special place, always on a special day, and everybody walks away with special thoughts and memories in their heart, and it's something that it'll stick with you forever. And first timers, if you're going to Kona, be prepared for not believing what you're seeing, and no matter what people told you how great it was, it's going to be much greater than any words were thrown your way about that race. Mark, you have been a true inspiration in our sport. You still are. It's an honor to work with you with TriDot and Ironman U and everything we do together. So thank you very much for being on the show. I think people are going to listen to this and go, you know what? He's not a bad guy after all. And they're talking about me. Well, take care of yourself, Mark. I'll give you your first big aloha to get to that big island and do what you do best. And know I'll be there with you in spirit.
All right, well, keep your phone next to you. I'll be giving you updates. I'll be texting you stuff all week long.
All right. Thanks,
Cheers,
brother. And thank you, everyone, for listening again to another edition of Find Your Finish Line on the Kona Preview. And thank you to Pillar Performance for your presenting sponsorship of my podcast. Take care of yourself, everyone. And always remember, you're the cause of your own experience. And if you keep those experiences around you positive, you will find your finish line. Aloha.